All right, so a different kind of power rankings, week 2. If you missed the first week, it's important that you understand how this works. Otherwise, you will be very confused at what you're looking at. So this power rankings is not my own personal opinions on who is going to win the Super Bowl this year. That has nothing to do with it. Basically, this offseason, what I did was I created a formula on what typically results in winning games. How good at certain positions you are correlates to a certain amount of points scored, which correlates to a certain amount of wins. You work it all together and figure out how many wins a team is probably going to get. It seems to be mostly accurate. Most teams are within a win or two of where to end up on this chart. At least that's how it was last year. So what I thought would be fun this year was to kind of do a week-by-week power rankings of this chart. Now, one issue with doing it this way, and again, I've talked about all of this already, so sorry if you're hearing it again, but one huge issue with this is that the small sample size is going to make it a little tough because, for a top 5 quarterback, like Teddy Bridgewater was considered a top 5 quarterback last week. Daniel Jones is considered a top 5 quarterback this week. That's according to Pro Football Focus's grades, which admittedly aren't perfect, and I do have some criticisms about that, but I also think that it's pretty good, and at least that's an objective ranking, whereas, for me making my own rankings, I think it's a little bit more difficult because I don't have time to truly study every single player from every single team week in and week out, so using their grades can just sort of be a baseline. So anyways, if that doesn't make sense, maybe watch my video last week so you can get a better explanation. And anyways, let's just jump into it. All right, so we're starting with the top 8, and then we're working backwards. That's the way I want to do this. I just think it's, easier to do it this way, even though it's probably builds more suspense to do it the other way. Also, should mention, you might hear some, I'm not sure if you can hear it, my microphone is pretty good, but there is some, yard work going on outside my apartment. So if you can't hear that, I apologize. That's what it is. They've been doing it for 3 straight days. Super frustrating, but that's besides the point. Let's get into the power rankings. So here we are at the top of the rankings. The Rams are going to stay here at number 1. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are now at number 2. You see both of these two teams have a lot of, high grades. As of right now, the Rams actually get more points or more wins for their receiving category. So they have a tier 1 receiving unit. As of right now, the Buccaneers have a tier 2 receiving unit, but I think you could also suspect that the Buccaneers would probably get up to tier 1 by the end of the season, so that might be the difference. But those two teams looking very good through 2 weeks. Number 3 is an AFC team. We have the Denver Broncos, who they were, after last week, were on pace for a perfect season. It has dropped off since then. Still on pace for 13 wins. Big part of that is Teddy Bridgewater being considered a tier 2 quarterback, and their receiving core being considered a tier 1 receiving core. Also, if you missed my last video, receiving core is not just wide receivers, but just receivers in general. So if you're a tight end and you're running a route, well, then you're a receiver on that play. If you're a halfback and you're running a route, you're a receiver on that play. That is how that works. And then again, 3 wins for coverage. That checks out. I suspect that they will be a tier 1 coverage unit. In fact, all 3 of the top 3 teams are considered tier 1 coverage units as of right now. Tampa Bay, I think, will probably fall, I would suspect, just given the fact that with Tampa Bay, a big part of that, I think, was the back-to-back pick sixes, which is a bit fluky. So I would imagine that they'll fall a little bit, but maybe not horrendously. Number 4, this is another surprise for me. The Philadelphia Eagles staying up here at number 4 despite losing to the San Francisco 49ers. But if you watch the game, you can kind of understand why they are so high. For one thing, they had a blowout win against the Falcons, so that's going to help them out, right? I think you see a lot of these teams that are high up have at least one blowout win, which is why. But you also look at, I think, the running game, getting 2.5 wins there, where you do get 2.5 wins for being a tier 1 running unit. I think that's probably a bit misleading. That probably will drop off a little bit. So and again, if it just goes to tier 2, that's almost 2 full wins you're losing. So that feels a bit more right. Also, Jalen Hurts being a tier 2 quarterback, I think that's fair for how he's played through 2 games. I just don't know how long that's going to last. But still, a mediocre coverage unit so far. We'll see how that holds up. And a tier 1 offensive line. So there's some good stuff about this team. This team definitely could compete for a playoff spot, even though 12.86 wins is certainly high. Number 5, the Arizona Cardinals. I think some Cardinals fans will be saying, wait a second, how is Kyler Murray just a tier 2 quarterback. Shouldn't he be tier 1? Well, again, take that up with Pro Football Focus. It's their grades I'm using. I'm just putting them into placement. He was not a top 5 according to them. I actually think that's fair. I think that he has missed some throws. Not really missed some throws, but he's taken some chances that didn't work out is probably the better way to phrase it, which is, probably why he's just maybe one step below as of right now. But tier 2 is still very good, especially when you add on that tier 1 receiving unit. That's a lot of wins right there. And their coverage has played surprisingly well. Their defense has played surprisingly well. But the question is, how much of that was just from the week 1 against the Tennessee Titans? Because last week wasn't quite as good. Even though there was a pick 6 in there that kind of made the final score look a little bit rougher. But still, through 2 weeks, they've been a top 5 team in football. I think that feels right to me. I don't think that's crazy. The Las Vegas Raiders, a bit high, but not a shocker. Because, again, tier 1 quarterback out of Derek Carr, that makes sense. A good receiving unit so far, which is kind of a pleasant surprise. And then their defense has played well. They've pretty much gotten a good amount of points across the board. One thing I forgot to mention as well, if you missed it last week, for kickers, I'm dividing all the points up evenly that you get for kickers just simply because it's just too small of a sample size to even kind of speculate here. Because some of these guys have kicked like 3 field goals. That's just too small, even for a video that's admittedly talking about small sample sizes. Number 7, the Dallas Cowboys. This is another one of these surprises. In fact, out of these top 8, there are 3 teams who are 1-1 right here. So a little bit of a surprise, especially with which 3 they are, I think, is maybe the bigger surprise. Dallas Cowboys, and especially they're doing this with just what's considered tier 3 quarterback play out of Dak. But what it really comes down to is tier 2 offensive line, tier 1 receiving core. They do get some points for the running game, and then they have some points for their defense. So that's kind of how it works. And also 10.58 wins. That's not super high. It's kind of just, there isn't a ton of teams right now that have looked like championship teams. Maybe like, honestly, maybe just 2 at this point, the Bucs and the Rams. But of course, we expect some of these other teams to eventually kind of become their potential. It just might take them a few weeks, which is, again, why I say this is a small sample size and kind of why I say all my opinions. Let's pump the brakes a little bit. There is some small sample size stuff here. The Seattle Seahawks at number 8. So I think this kind of makes sense. They had a, not a complete blowout, but a handed win in week 1, and then they lost in overtime week 2. You have Russell Wilson at just a tier 2 quarterback play. That'll probably go up. Tier 2 receiving core, that could go up, but might stay at tier 2. Either way, that seems about fine. And then you have some other points scattered across the board. To me, through 2 weeks, this does check out. I think that putting them here at 8, again, it's not a predictor. It's just for what they've done 2 weeks. This feels right for me, actually. All right, so number 9, we have the 1-1 New England Patriots, still getting here as a top 10 team. There's a bigger surprise right below them, but we'll get on to that in a second. I think a big reason why the Patriots are a 10.45 win team, according to the system, is they have credit for that tier 1 running back room, and that is where we've seen some variance because it is so important getting that tier 1 status, whereas getting tier 2 or below nowhere near as important. So if Harris ends up being like an elite back, this could be right. 10.45, I can totally see that. Mediocre quarterback play out of a rookie is great, quite frankly, and mediocre receiving core play. Tier 3, that's kind of better than we thought, and there's maybe even some room to improve with their coverage. Run defense hasn't been very good, so that's maybe their biggest weakness. But as a whole, that's why the Patriots are there. And yeah, number 10 is, when I saw this, I was like, what? How is this possible? Well, according to Pro Football Focus, Daniel Jones has been the second best quarterback in football through 2 weeks. I don't agree with that, quite frankly. But again, that's fine. We don't have to all agree. I think people get too aggressive when they disagree with something. Okay, I disagree with Pro Football Focus. That's cool. We're allowed to do that. Still respect them. That's fine. And that's clearly the big thing, right? That's 4 of their 10 wins are coming straight from there. So if you think that Daniel Jones is actually a tier 5 quarterback that would get 0 wins there, well, now they're down to a 6-win team. And I think the rest of it feels about right for me. Maybe their offensive line would be tier 5 instead of 4, but it's around there for me. I think their coverage has been good. It's sort of the front 7 that struggled. So far through 2 weeks at least. So, and maybe they even have some wins to be had with that running game. So it's definitely low, but also is it a tier 1 running back unit? I don't know. But as a whole, definitely one of the early surprises through 2 weeks, and one I suspect that after another week or two will fall off. But we'll see, because again, they are 0-2 and somehow a top 10 team according to the system. Small sample sizes affect the system. I've talked about that a lot. The Cleveland Browns here at number 11. So the Cleveland Browns, I think that they probably have more room to improve. I think the real disappointment with the Browns has been their defense. Their defense has been, to put it lightly, mediocre. I mean, that's kind of being maybe a little bit generous, which is a bit disappointing. I think that their coverage hasn't been as good as we expected it to be heading into this season. That's kind of why I had them as like Super Bowl favorites, is because I thought their coverage could be great. And we also kind of suspected, well, it might take some time. So maybe this is a team that will struggle here, but kind of towards the end of the season, shoot up the rankings, and they could potentially be similar to Tampa Bay, a team that doesn't necessarily do great in the regular season, but still does good in the regular season and hits their stride come postseason time when the games really matter. Also, Odell Beckham Jr. coming back should help that receiving core, could turn it into a tier 1 from a tier 2. Next, we have the Carolina Panthers here. So a tier 2 team, a 2-0 team who is here at top 12. So this is, top 14 are in theory playoff teams. Although, again, the small sample size throws things off. I think that this feels mostly right. There's kind of a couple of glaring. I'm not sure how well that will hold up. For one thing, the quarterback play, Darnold certainly has been a tier 3 quarterback. That just totally checks out, in my opinion. Will that hold? Will he improve? Will he decline? Put a pin in that one for sure. The running game is just going to improve. And maybe it has. Maybe this is a grading issue on PFF's part. But regardless, I think that, there's probably 2.5 wins you could add there, honestly. So you add those 2.5 wins, this team looks a lot better. Although, again, the other issue I have is the coverage unit. Is that truly tier 1, or is it because they went up against 2 bad receiving cores? Remains to be seen, I guess. So they're an interesting team. Definitely a team that I could see going a lot of different ways. But so far, a playoff team, but not an elite team, feels about right for how they played 2 weeks. Number 13, the Bengals. And to me, the Cincinnati Bengals are a classic example of, you can outcoach your talent, basically, in good ways or in bad ways. And I think that I just don't love the way that they've coached this team. I think a better coach wins that game against the Bears. I don't know why they insist on running so much, even when it's not the correct decision. Listen, sometimes it's the correct decision. Against the Chicago Bears, it is not. They did anyways. That was just, even though the passing game wasn't working as well, I think you got to keep going. Trust that your quarterback and your receivers can figure it out. And then, when Burrow finally did make a couple mistakes, they opened it up, started throwing more. They actually got moving the ball down the field, but it was kind of too little too late at that point, not enough time left. As far as all of their grades go, I don't really have a huge issue with any of them, to be honest. That feels about right for me across the board. Number 14, another issue of tier 1 quarterback play from Kirk Cousins. Not sure about that, so I think that would probably knock him down. I have Kirk Cousins as a tier 3 quarterback. That feels more correct for me, which means that, it's actually a 7.2 win team, which probably does ring a little bit more true. Although the flip side is Dalvin Cook is probably a tier 1 running back, which gets them back up those 2 wins, so maybe it's kind of a wash at the end of the day. The coverage has been okay, but the rest of the defense not so good. And their receiving core kind of been a bit of a bummer so far, because again, I think they'll improve. We saw them do great stuff last year. Just need to see a little bit more improvements through 2 games this year. Number 15, the Los Angeles Chargers. This is another interesting one, I think, for the Chargers. They're 1-1, but they could have easily been 2-0. They also kind of could have been 0-2 as well. So they're kind of one of those weird teams, which kind of makes sense why they're near 500. One interesting thing is their coverage is only considered a tier 3 unit, but I feel like the way that they're coached, it makes them better than that. So I think that could actually be an area where they're getting more, they deserve more wins than they're getting. I also think that their run defense tier 5, that might actually be the same thing. It might have more talent, but due to the fact that they're constantly being put in bad positions, that could make it look a little worse, even though I know PFF does take that into consideration, but still subconsciously, it could make a difference. Tier 2 quarterback play from Herbert, that feels right for me. Made a couple mistakes, but has been great outside of that. And again, there's only 5 spots for a tier 1, so tier 2 is still pretty good. Receiving core has been solid. could use maybe a little bit more high-end talent at a couple positions, perhaps. And then you have the Titans, who kind of have the opposite problem. They, have some high-end talent, but kind of struggle in other areas. The biggest issue, like tier 2 for Ryan Tannehill, that's completely right. That's just where he is. Receiving core, though, being tier 4, that is really rough in my opinion. That is very below what you would want, especially when it's kind of a surprise because they obviously have Julio and A.J. Brown. But, so far, Pro Football Focus, not impressed, but probably will improve throughout the season. The run game, finally back up to tier 1, was not there last week, but then Derrick Henry said, no, I'm still Derrick Henry. So that checks out. They definitely deserve those 2.5 wins. And the defense hasn't even been completely trash, but it's been, relatively trash. So that's where they're at. And, that's just kind of going back to what we know about last year. At least the tier 3 coverage unit is improved a lot, but front 7 not doing much. So 9.4 wins for the Titans, still top half of the league. That is a fringe playoff team as of right now. And if their receiving core gets better, they're probably a playoff team. All right, so next 8 teams. The Green Bay Packers here at 17, which makes sense, right? They looked horrible one week and then looked pretty good the next week. So kind of getting putting into the mediocre range, that does kind of check out. Still just tier 4 quarterback play from Rodgers, but again, I thought he looked good against the Lions. He didn't get too much opportunities against the Lions to look good, but when he did, he made the most of it, although did miss a couple throws. But I think that's, the low grade stems from his bad week 1 performance. That's what it stems from. Offensive line has looked great through 2 weeks. The receiving core has looked fine. Again, they could use another receiver, but Packers fans, for whatever reason, don't want to admit that. And I'd probably put the running game, again, tier 4 and 5 gets 0 wins there, so that's why there's a lot of zeros. And actually, tier 2 and 3 gets you 0.63. So there's only 3 different wins you can get in the running game. They get 0. I probably would put them in 0.63, to be honest, but that's just where I stand. And coverage has been good. Coverage has been, again, Eric Stokes looks good. He's a rookie. He's going to make mistakes, but so far has looked good and kind of makes a big difference with that coverage unit, even though he didn't play much in week 1. We have a couple of surprises coming down the stretch here. I mean, these next 4 teams have 5 wins between them, so all being in the bottom half is a bit shocking, I would say, to say the least. I mean, the Kansas City Chiefs, so we'll start off, we'll just go in order. Chiefs, again, they're actually a sub 500 team according to this. Worth mentioning, like I keep saying, this is not predicting anything. So Mahomes only getting tier 3 quarterback grades is a bit surprising to me. I'd have him better than that. He's a tier 1 quarterback. We all know that. So giving him an extra 2 wins, that does put them up to, about 10.4 wins, which would actually put them all the way up to a top 10 team. So that would change a lot just right there. Receiving unit doing great. Yeah, that checks out. Offensive line, running game, all that checks out. Their defense, though, has been a bit of an issue so far. I think that's fair to say. Yeah, there is kind of some issues on this defense, but I think that the offense is good enough they can outwork that. So clearly the Chiefs are still a playoff team, and they were close to being 2-0, although another team that could have been 0-2 as well had the Browns game gone differently. So number 19, the 49ers, this is another surprise to me. I think that, their running game hasn't been great. At least it was really rough against the Eagles, but how much of that was the Niners and how much of that was the Eagles being good? But it's also kind of weird because across the board, it's not like there's a ton here where I'm like, oh, well, that's horribly wrong. What really here do I say, that's rough? Probably pass rush should probably be better than, I believe that's tier 3 pass rush, so it feels like there should probably be an improvement there. But as a whole, through 2 weeks, there is kind of some wins getting left on the table a little bit here for the 49ers, I think. But the difference as well is their coaching staff is good enough. They're going to outwin what their talent gives them. So I think they'll probably be better than that. Number 20, so I think I know the issue with this one for the Ravens is they had Lamar as a tier 4 quarterback, which I just don't know how you can do that. I think, again, like I say, Pro Football Focus, I think, is very good. I do think that there are some issues. I think one of the issues is they don't evaluate rushing quarterbacks properly. That's just how I view it. They're, more than welcome to disagree. And I mean, it also should be mentioned, I'm literally only checking how you throw the ball on the quarterback thing, which is probably a flaw on my part, but that's the easier way to do it. So that's how I'm doing it. So that could be a flaw. But you add 3 wins there, you're now looking at 9.5 wins for the Ravens. And you could, if you have him as a tier 1 quarterback, or you could even say, hey, he makes the running back room 2.5 wins because he's kind of a part of that. So you add 2 wins there, and maybe you add 3. You could make an argument you should add five wins to the Ravens just from Lamar Jackson. I wouldn't probably go that far, but I think you could at least make the argument of 3 wins, maybe even 4, but that's maybe a conversation for another day. To me, the best part about the Ravens and the most exciting part about the Ravens right now is that tier 3 receiving unit. I mean, that's just great to see. Lamar has had so much struggles with the receiving unit, and with Rashad Bateman coming back, we could see really Lamar maybe have a breakout season, which is crazy to say since he's won an MVP, but maybe a breakout season in the passing game if there's more receiving help than he's had in years past. The issue with the Ravens right now that I think is that coverage unit and just that defense in general, and it's largely due to, I think, Peters getting hurt just hurts them, but maybe it has something to do as well with just the Raiders and the Chiefs being good passing attacks, making them look worse. So I fully expect the Ravens, to jump a number of teams. And number 21, the Steelers. I mean, what's crazy is that, these 5 teams that I have starting off this bottom half, I had all in the playoffs, and the Saints I had as just one spot below the postseason. I had them as the number 8 seed in the NFC. So kind of interesting stuff there. But yeah, for the Ravens, for the Steelers, the tier 5 quarterback play hurts. I expected them to have tier 3 quarterback play. That's 2 wins right off the board. And the rest of the offense has been fine. It hasn't been spectacular. And then they have their coverage unit really falling off a cliff, going all the way down to tier 5, which I just don't know if I fully agree. I think that there were some issues, but I also think that part of it was the Raiders are good and Derek Carr is good, and that made it look worse because, the Steelers were given a tier 2 coverage unit after week 1. So this just feels a lot of, stuff that's low to me. I'd probably have their coverage unit at least at a tier 3, which would give them an extra 1.5. And, if Big Ben does improve, you're looking a little bit better, right? You're now looking at maybe a playoff team like we kind of expected they could be. Number 22, the New Orleans Saints here. They just had a bad week. I mean, there's no getting around it. I don't think Winston is as bad as he played in week 2. I don't think he's as good as he played in week 1. I think he probably will, at times, though, play as well as he did in week 1, and he will play as poorly as he did in week 2. That's kind of just what you deal with Jameis as your quarterback. The nice thing about the Saints, Alvin Kamara, tier 1 running back, that checks out. However, the receiving core hasn't been great, and I think a big difference as well is, listen, they were banged up. A lot of their injuries on defense, that did hurt their defense. Their defense did not look good in that Panthers game. So even though they looked great in that Packers game, one great game and then one horrible game, partially due to injuries, which this does not factor in, that's going to hurt them a little bit. They will be better than a 6-win team. I just think they will be. So now we have the Miami Dolphins, and this is actually kind of funny because I got a lot of criticism for having them as about a 6.5-win team before the season, and now they've actually underperformed my expectations through 2 games, and they've overperformed in the quarterback category. I had them as a tier 5 quarterback room. They've been a tier 4 quarterback room. How much of that is Tua? How much of that is Brissett? You be the judge. Either way, it hasn't been great. It's still tier 4. That's not good. But a tier 5 O-line, that checks out. Tier 5 receiving core feels a bit low. I think that'll probably improve. So I think they'll be better in that category, but will they drop off in the quarterback category, especially now that Tua is injured? And Myles Gaskin did not have he was a tier 1 quarterback week 1. It was a small sample size thing. We all knew it. Their coverage is still awesome, but this is a team that basically can cover well, don't do a lot else well. So that's kind of the issue with the Miami Dolphins, other than coaching well. So again, a team I would probably suspect that would, do better than, they would outcoach their talent level. At 24, we have the Balls here. This is the Washington football team. You have, their O-line's been good. They actually got tier 3 quarterback play, which is nice. But other than that, Pro Football Focus not impressed with this team. Their defense has been disappointing. And, if you can't cover, you can't win in the NFL. So that's kind of the issue. They've definitely been a big disappointment so far through 2 weeks. I had high hopes for them, and they've disappointed. They really have. Okay, final 8 now. This is the bottom 8. You're going to see a couple surprises towards the bottom, but let's start at the top and work our way down. The Texans, maybe a bit of a surprise that they're the 8th worst team in football. A lot of people thought they'd be the worst team in football. I preseason had them that way. They still could be. There's still time left. But what's going to happen with this team is, 1 win, for quarterback play. That'll probably go down to 0 with Davis Mills coming in, I would suspect. But they have some talent on the offense, and this is actually something we talked about preseason. I thought their O-line and receiving core would be tier 4 each. They've been tier 3 each, but that's, you're getting some wins right there. No real running game and no real run defense, but a mediocre coverage unit on top of this. Part of that was the interceptions Trevor Lawrence threw week 1, so maybe if that drops off, you're losing another win or so, but I don't think it's crazy to think that this is still like maybe a 4 or 5 win team. I don't think that's crazy. I do think they got a little bit of a better situation just with the Browns' 2 bad turnovers early on in that game, kind of made it look like the Texans had a shot, but the Browns really took over after that point. So I think that was kind of one of those, sure, it was kind of competitive at a certain point, but the Browns were winning that game. Number 26, the Chicago Bears. So they actually, Andy Dalton for 2 weeks has gotten them a tier 4 quarterback room. We'll see how that goes with Fields taking over, who, we'll get to it in a minute, but rookie quarterbacks have had a hard time so far in 2021, except for Mac Jones, who has done fine, but not spectacular. And then, a lot of okay across the board. No zeros across the board, but a lot of tier 4s, basically just about everywhere. Running back is a little bit better than tier 4, but, run defense a little bit better than tier 4, but as a whole, and pass rush as well. But they just kind of struggled, and their coverage looked better week 2, but they didn't have too much to do. So I want to see a team really kind of push the ball on Chicago like we saw week 1 and see if that coverage getting better was actually a thing or if it was just a mirage due to a Zach Taylor offense. Number 27, the Detroit Lions. Hey, how about Jared Goff giving them tier 3 quarterback play? That's nice, and that checks out. I had him there preseason. Like, he's not a horrible quarterback like people make him out to be. He's not an elite quarterback, but he's fine. He's okay. Offensive line also looked really good against the Packers, has done its fair share to look well. That's pretty much all they got. They don't have anything else really at all that's above a tier 4, except for pass rush, which is tier 3, and you don't get that much points unless you have a tier 1 pass rush, which is only goes to 5 teams. So as a whole, not a ton of wins outside of that, quarterback offensive line 1-2 punch. 28, the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think the Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence has to be thanking God that Zach Wilson had such a bad day so people aren't focused on his own bad couple of performances. He looked like a rookie. Like, it's not concerning, but he did look like a rookie. And the Jaguars, despite being this poorly, still have 2.5 wins with their running game, but they barely ran the ball. So that's going to drop. Like, they haven't earned those 2.5 wins, and you take off 2 of those wins. Well, now we're looking at a sub 3 win team, because they get a little bit with their offensive line being tier 3. They get a little bit with their run defense actually being, I believe that's tier 3 as well. So yes, it is. So that's tier 3 as well. So a couple tier 3s and a lot of tier 5s, putting them, as a bottom 5 team. The Atlanta Falcons, they're interesting as well because Matt Ryan has actually given them tier 3 quarterback play through 2 weeks. That does kind of check out. He played well against Tampa before those, interceptions, which weren't really even his fault entirely, although he did have some other dangerous passes, so maybe it kind of all evened out. But, again, as a whole, receiving core looked a little better than last week. Their defense looked a little better than last week, not much. This is still it's a rough unit. It is. And it's not really Matt Ryan's fault through 2 weeks, although he isn't exactly playing electric either. Now at 30, the biggest surprise. This almost made me say, is this whole list wrong? Should I just throw this out? I don't think it's a problem with the formula. I think it's a problem with Pro Football Focus's grades. I'm putting the blame on them. I am shifting the blame. That's what I'm doing because I don't get how Josh Allen, he's not been MVP candidate Josh Allen, but he hasn't been a tier 5 quarterback either, in my opinion, although maybe I need to study the games more. I might do that. But they also have a tier 5 O-line and a tier 5 receiving unit with a little bit of wins with the run game. But they have them as like the worst offense in football, which is just not true. I just don't see that being the case. So I think that there will be some improvements there. It's a shock to me. Defense actually checks out. Basically all of their wins come from defense right here, so that seems about right. But they've got at least enough. I mean, if Josh Allen is just a tier 2 quarterback and the receiving unit is tier 2, we're adding an extra 5 wins on just with that alone. Offensive line, you get another win there, we're talking playoff teams. So I think it's just been, kind of a weird couple of weeks for them. So don't freak out. And I still don't agree with the grades regardless. But it doesn't seem like it's the system's fault for me, I would say. It's kind of more of just the grades thing. Number 31, the Colts. This is another surprise, but I do kind of get it. Again, keep in mind, this is not talking about predicting. It's just talking about how you've been through 2 weeks. And, you look at the bad teams, it's like, okay, well, the Jaguars have had at least a couple of things go well, and also that running game just kind of throws things off. So, well, they're probably worse. That 2.5 wins puts them above the Colts. And then the Falcons, they've had like Matt Ryan show up a little bit. Carson Wentz, tier 4, he does give them a win. But other than that, all they get is a tier 4 receiving unit and good run defense. But as a whole, they haven't been able to rush the passer. They haven't been able to cover well. And their offensive line hasn't played well. So there's not really a lot to like about the talent so far on this team. I like the coaching staff for sure. And they nearly beat, kind of goes to show kind of the weirdness of how this works. Is they nearly beat the number 1 team, and they're sitting here at 31. But again, that's kind of a little bit fluky. There was a special teams play in there and all of that stuff. So I think this will obviously be better. But through 2 weeks, I don't actually hate it that much because, again, they did look bad against the Seahawks. Looked a little better against the Rams. We'll see what they do next week. And number 32, the New York Jets here. I mean, listen, Zach Wilson, he actually gave them a win last week in terms of the total grade. Not he won them last week because obviously they didn't win. But, now you have a little bit for the offensive line, and then there's a few tier 4s sprinkled in here, but they haven't really been able to get anything, over 1 win except for that offensive line. So they just don't have any of those like chunk categories getting some wins there. So this is a bad Jets team. We all know it. We don't have to spend forever on that. So yeah, that's this video. I don't feel like turning on my camera again, so we're just going to end it here. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Again, it's a unique thing. I don't know how much people really feel about this kind of stuff, but I enjoy making it, and I just think it's a fun kind of video. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed it, and of course, as always, thanks for watching.